Good evening. It is now 6:30, and I will call the November 13th Planning Commission meeting to order. Staff, thank you for joining us. Commissioners, thank you. Our first item of the evening is approval of the agenda. Commissioners, I would stand for a motion unless there's any changes.
None for me, Chair.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion and a
Second.
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes. Our second item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the October 23rd, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any changes to those minutes? No changes? Any changes from staff?
None from staff.
Changes? I would stand for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes. Our third item is a public hearing to consider approval of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan draft to submit to adjacent jurisdictions for mandatory 6-month review period. And presenting tonight is Ms. Faulkner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with me is Jeff Miller, who's with
Mr. Miller.
Hoisington Kogler. You recognize him. We're just going to provide a brief overview tonight. As you know this well as we do. The Planning Commission is the body that's responsible for preparing the comprehensive plan for communities, and you've been part of our citizen review group every step of the way, so I know that you're well engaged, and none of this should be new to you. If it is, we have not done our job communicating that to you along the way. But we do want to provide an overview just for the public and those that may be watching this later. So what is a comprehensive plan? A comprehensive plan, it's a document, a fairly large document, 300, 400 pages, give or so, that talks about what the community wants to be. What is our vision? It basically is our vision plan. At Burnsville's plan, we articulate city council adopted ends and outcomes, and those are their goals related to the community going forward. And certainly there's a lot of policy that's set forth in a comprehensive plan that guides future decisions that the city makes, particularly when it comes to land use. Our first comprehensive plan was adopted in 1965. Burnsville is what I would consider a planned community. We have been had comprehensive plans since the Land Use Planning Act went into effect by the state, and certainly we've updated every 10 years as is required by the Met Council as well. Regarding the Met Council, as I've stated, we are required to put together a plan. Our plan has to be consistent with the Metropolitan Council regional plan for the area. There are 4 specific components that we have to make sure that we are compliant with. That relates to land use, transportation, water resources, parks and trails. And then there is also a housing component that we have to make sure that we have requirements and affordable housing needs met with that. The Met Council puts together a system statement every 10 years for communities, and then that is our guide plan from the Met Council as far as what needs to be included in our plan. So in putting together our 2040 draft plan, we started about 18 months ago. As I stated, we have Hoisington Kogler here. You'll see their areas of engagement, involvement, and experience, and Jeff is here from them. SEH deals primarily with a lot of the technical parts, and you've met them along the way, the transportation, parks, water, sanitary, sewer. And then Tangible Consulting, Tom was here early on to talk about some of the economic development initiatives that we had and statistics and help put together that chapter. And then EOR has helped us with our sustainability and natural resources plan. How we got started on this was having a Citizens Advisory Committee. As noted before, the Planning Commission was a big part of that, and thank you all for your extra time. Those were extra meetings that were not part of necessarily what you signed up for. Several residents were here. We had a group of about 21 people. Business representatives were here, school districts, youth representatives, faith representatives, real estate representatives. These were all published public meetings, and the public attended many of those meetings, and we of course solicited comments from the public that did attend when they did. There was quite a large community engagement process put forth, and you can see all the places that we were at over the last 18 months. I won't read through them all. Specifically, though, we had some neighborhood meetings with those that would be affected by what our focus areas are, held several open houses here in the council chambers, met with the Chamber of Commerce as well on a couple of occasions. This plan also includes the incorporation of the Parks Master Plan, which has been updated at the same time, as well as our Water Resources Management Plan. And then we did check in every quarter with the City Council to make sure they were comfortable with the direction that the Citizens Advisory Group was headed in. So here are the 8 chapters of our plan, and our goal was to update the 2030 comp plan. The 2030 comp plan was put into place in 2008. Since that plan was adopted with the recession that came in, there hadn't been a lot of development or redevelopment that had occurred in the last 10 years. So rather than reinvent the wheel, given that, we thought we would just update the plan that we had, so that set the framework going forward. In this, though, there was emphasis on 4 focus areas, and I'll get into those in a second, but also an overriding purview of sustainability. Burnsville has been a community that's been on the front edge of sustainability as far as cities go in the metro area, and we want to continue to be at the forefront, and we believe that there's lots of things that we can do and continue to do in that regard. So the focus areas include heart of the city, Burnsville Center retail area, 42 corridor. We talk about the Orange Line, BRT stations, bus rapid transit areas, the Minnesota River Quadrant, and then our industrial areas near East Cliff Road. And I'm going to highlight those. I know you've seen these before, but just more so for the public or anyone who may be watching where we've landed on this. The draft plan has been put together for you. As you noted, Mr. Chair, this is for your consideration to review the draft plan. And so what we have in it on these 4 future areas regarding heart of the city, the area on the top right is HLC 1, the area that's primarily developed now, 54 acres. With the introduction of the Orange Line, there's some expectations for transit-oriented development from the Met Council and what happens within a half-mile radius of those stations. So you'll see, here's the Orange Line station planned at the southwest corner of 13 and Nicollet. And then there's also a station planned at Burnsville Parkway and Travelers Trail. So the half-mile radius from each of these is where high density, more intensive land uses, walkability is going to be looked at and expected as we move forward with meeting the Met Council's goals. And you'll see here, heart of the city 1, this area extends north of 13, this TOD area. Over our Travelers Trail, the TOD area extends on the west side of 35W, which presented some interesting conversations that we had regarding what the future of those areas hold. When we look at the build-out of HLC2, what we're talking about here is adding some more housing along Pillsbury Avenue, perhaps a greenway that follows 122nd Street, adding some high-density residential here, could be condos, could be rental, and then another park area, maybe not as structured as Nicollet Commons Park, but certainly a secondary green area for gathering space on the west side of what we know as heart of the city. Maximizing the land uses along the Burnsville Parkway on the south side. Those buildings right now are set back pretty far, and there's lots of parking. What can we do there? So there's some opportunities to be had. And then when we look at this secondary transit area, BRT station, when you look at this half-mile radius, there may be opportunity to redevelop what's along Aldrich Avenue. Those may not be the highest and best uses. They may have run their course. So our future plan is showing an opportunity for some mixed use along the Burnsville Parkway and then some type of housing, high-density housing behind that. That could serve that transit station very well. Going further to the west, there's some older rental buildings here that are much lower density. Those are fairly old, antiquated type of building structure and design. It's possible that there may be opportunity to do something there as well in the future. When we looked at the East Cliff Road Business Park, during those discussions, it was discovered that this is a very highly successful existing kind of incubator area in the city. There's a lot of businesses here. There's a lot of good paying businesses here, equivalent to the South Cross Business Park area, which was something none of us expected. The buildings may look a little dilapidated or not as kept up on the surface, but what is happening in those buildings is functioning very well for our community, and we have a lot of small businesses that are thriving here. So the outcome of this area was that certainly could use some sprucing up. There is this aesthetic to it that people think it's a dying part of town, when really it's not, but the perception is that it is. And so the land use plan going forward doesn't change the land uses, but it does add some amenities with trails, green space, and perhaps some future shared parking. And an identity, creating an identity for this area is also important. Looking at the Minnesota River Quadrant, this is something that we're all familiar with. It was in our 2030 plan. So I'm going to show you 3 slides that were discussed. And this first slide talks about the current land use plan. You'll see we've got office showroom plan on the very north part of the city. We've got the Kramer Quarry, which is this 350-acre parcel. When they're done mining, this will be a lake. On the east side, they have a variety of uses from residential, kind of town center mixed use, and then office showroom along the highway. South of the railroad tracks on the existing plan from 2008, there was plans for a medical technical campus in the southeast corner of the MRQ, surrounded by office showroom. And then we have the mixed use or commercial uses along the interchange of 13 and County Road 5, and then further to the west, more commercial. So this was the current plan. As we looked at the future and what opportunities lie in there and what we know now that we didn't know in 2008 when that plan was created, is that there may be an opportunity to have more development on the west side of this existing landfill once it's remediated. The plans have not been put into place yet from the NPCA and with the owner, so perhaps what would we like to see as our highest and best use? What opportunities do we think? So we thought it was worth talking about and at least putting in what our desired land uses would be if the entire property were remediated. We also talked about the east area of the quarry, and we're proposing to change that to something a little bit more general, and I'll show that on the next slide. And then this medical technical campus that's a little antiquated is very specific, and so making it more broad, maybe getting us to more of our objectives without closing out some other businesses that may be just as viable. So looking at our concept plan for the MRQ, where does that leave us? With adding some residential along the river would be ideal. We are a river town, but we don't act like one, but we have a lot of riverfront here in Burnsville. Keeping the office showroom along the highway, the high visible corridor, easy in, easy out, access to 35W. Changing the uses to be more general on the east side of the quarry, so mixed use along the quarry, that could be housing, retail, shops, office, and then office showroom along the 35W corridor, again, easy in and out for trucks, so, excuse me. And then in the southeast corner, changing this all to office showroom types uses instead of the specific business medical campus. It could still be a medical campus someday, but this also allows it to be something else if that's what the market would want. The last area we spent a little bit of time talking about was the Burnsville Center retail corridor area. There's some opportunities there. We've got Orange Line Phase 2 that's being planned somewhere in this corridor along 35 in the Burnsville Center area. It has yet to be determined where. There certainly is potential for mixed use and housing here as we think about the land uses that are there, all the parking that's there, what could be done there. We are looked at challenges facing other malls or should in the future, learning from those other malls, and setting the stage for a future land use study of the County Road 42 corridor as an implementation item. We didn't have time to get into all the details of that, but certainly it's recognized that we need to do that going forward. So from the land use plan, looking at 2040, what's proposed in this plan is to change from business use, I'll go back here, you'll see it was all guided business use, commercial, retail. So changing the properties that do not front on County Road 42, changing these to a mixed use or mixed use office. The 42 corridor is very successful, and we believe it will always be successful as a retail corridor. So to keep those commercial businesses up front where the traffic and visibility is, that's where they want to be. And then provide for other types of uses off of that corridor a little bit. Could be office, could be hotel, could be residential, high density mixed use. We're not quite sure where the transit station will be for Phase 2 of the Orange Line, but certainly it could be anywhere within this area, which would also accompany the higher density mixed-use zoning that we're proposing. And certainly there's lots of flexibility when we integrate transit-oriented development with mixed use, and then what's happening in the retail physically in our physical environment. There's a lot of opportunity to be had here. So changing this sets the stage for us to capture some of those opportunities. And I'll stop there if you have any questions or follow-up questions on the focus area or how we got here before I turn it over to Jeff to talk about the specifics of land use changes.
Any questions? No questions.
Okay,
None.
okay. Mr. Miller?
Thanks, Jenny.
Sure.
All right.
Switch spots.
Good evening. My name's Jeff Miller. I think everybody knows that. And certainly one of the most important guiding tools of the comp plan is the 2040 future land use plan map. The current plan has a 2030 map, so this map's being updated to look out that extra 10 years out to 2040. So what I'm going to talk about tonight really briefly is just the proposed changes between what's in the 2030 plan and the 2040 plan. What we did to get there was to look at the focus areas, which Jenny just covered in great detail. We looked at the TOD areas, which Jenny also talked about. We looked at the vacant land that's in the city today versus what was there 10 years ago. And then we looked at the aging strip retail centers. As you might have remembered, we talked about those. But the city did a study of all the aging retail strip centers, I think back in 2002. So quite a while ago, but not very many of those have redeveloped yet. But they still represent opportunities down the road when there is market interest in those, for those to be something different. And so we looked at those closer and are recommending some changes for a few of those. And then lastly, we looked at the whole map, updated the existing land use map, and based on the vacant land, there were some housekeeping changes. So with that, there's just basically 5 key areas that we're recommending changes to the land use map. First one is Burnsville Parkway, the I-35W, which is a future BRT station area. Jenny talked about the area to the west of the interchange specifically. So everything to the east is guided for heart of the city as a land use, so we're not changing that. What we are changing is on the west side to a mixed use area south of Burnsville Parkway and west of 35, and then to the north from low density residential to medium density residential. The next one is the Burnsville Transit Station at Highway 13 Nicollet Avenue. I think as Jenny mentioned, there's going to be a new station down here for the BRT, but as you know, the park and ride is up here, and there's transit, I would say transit-oriented housing already there next to that park and ride, so we felt like the long-term use there for guidance-wise should be mixed use rather than just strictly business. As I mentioned, the aging retail strip centers, there's probably about, I don't know, 15 or 20 of those that are identified in the comp plan. We looked at all those and felt at this time that there was 3 of them that were probably had more likelihood of being redeveloped in the timeframe of the 2040 plan. So those 3 are the Highway 13 and Diffley Road, so right up in the almost northeast corner of the city, re-guiding that from business or commercial to mixed use. The Cliff View Plaza at Highway 13 and Cliff Road. See if I got my arrows right. Yeah, at Cliff Road and 13, right there. And then the last one is at Nicollet and 138th. Again, all 3 of those are currently shown up as business, office, retail on the map, and now they would be mixed use. They could redevelop as just commercial, but this would allow them to do something more than just commercial in the future. And then the Burnsville Center area, which was not one of the focus areas when we started the project, but was adopted as a focus area as we went through this, as you remember. So we looked at the mall, of course, and then the area around it. And as Jenny explained, the decision was to retain the commercial use long-term, or guiding the commercial use long-term along the 42 corridor. That's an important regional retail corridor. But south of there, in the area that we have highlighted here, allowing that to go to mixed use. And as you might remember, we looked at, I think, 4 different cities that have regional malls in the Twin Cities and how they studied their mall areas and what they decided to do. And at least a couple of them also did this, where they re-guided significant portions of their mall areas for mixed use. And the example we talked about a lot was Southdale and how that's changing before our eyes. So this would allow that kind of development to happen longer term. And then one of those housekeeping things is this parcel, I think this is 5, southwest quadrant of 5 and 42. It's a city-owned property, not very developable. The city was able to purchase it through some conservation funding money quite a while ago, it sounds like. It's been guided for industrial. It's right next to an industrial area, obviously the South Cross Business Park. So the recommendation is to change that from industrial to open space long-term. So that's what we have as far as the map. There's just a couple of other cleanup things that I think mostly had to do with properties that have been residential that maybe were guided commercial, and just need to be cleaned up, so. Any questions about the land use map?
Any questions, Commission?
Chair, I have a question. The changes we're making around Burnsville Center, how do we draw that line, the black line there between where, is it, so many feet off of 42? How are we going to determine that this is mixed use and this is business retail? Just so I understand.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that thought process, but how do we kind of arbitrarily draw that line?
Yeah, good question. So one of the ways is the dimension of what kind of commercial development would be along the corridor. You need to have enough land there that you could actually redevelop it with commercial. So if some liner buildings came in and wanted to build out there, this would allow that. I would say in general though, even though now with GIS systems or geographic information systems, land uses get really tied to parcels or property lines. I think in general, land uses, the lines shouldn't be that discrete. They should be, generally, the corridor of Highway 42 should be commercial. How deep that goes there should be some flexibility there. So what we're showing though is that the dimension along the south side of the road would allow commercial, there's enough space for commercial to be built there. I don't know if that answers your question.
I just, as an example, you go north, we've got residential and it's kind of divided by McAndrews. So we've got residential and we've got
Here.
commercial. And if you go across the property at Burnsville Center, we're taking a property that has multiple owners and we're kind of, and once again, I'm not disagreeing with the thought process. I'm trying to understand, if we have an applicant come back in front of us and say, I want to build, but X amount of it's going to be on the other side of this kind of arbitrary line, how do we manage that?
Yeah, Commissioners, I would say when we move forward with our study of the corridor, that'll give us a more definitive, I think, discussion of where that line should be.
Okay.
It may be possible that the mixed use go all the way up to 42, but it just seemed like that should be preserved for commercial and commercial only. And, when you think about what could go here, I think one of the things we're thinking about is high-density residential. And certainly that may make more sense on the southerly part of this area as opposed to the northerly along 42. So that's why we kind of kept that commercial aligned somewhere. But I think when we do that study, we can look at where is that appropriate line. We just drew it parallel to 42, kind of the same distance as some of those other parcels, and that may line up with the building on the north side. I'm not recalling, but it appears like it does line up with the building.
Once again, I'm not disagreeing
Sure.
with the thought process. Just imagined going forward an application and I want to build X and it's going to be on 42 and go back, and I'm not used to the land use zoning not kind of following some sort of
A property line.
property line or a street or
Sure.
something. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Walter, any questions? Nope. No questions? I just had one clarification piece. With the Cliff Road Business Park area, Jenny, you had mentioned that there was no changes to land use there, but I just wanted to quick clarify. I know there had been a lot of discussion about opening up zoning in there to allow for other types of businesses because it's zoned, I think, industrial.
I-1.
I-1 right now. And that had been talked about in the meetings, and then I did see the Economic Development Commission had mentioned that too. Was there any thought put into that? Now that I'm looking at the draft map, I do see it's zoned as mixed use, so maybe that addresses my question.
Well, it should be shown guided as industrial,
Yeah.
is how that's shown. Here, where are we at here? Cliff Road Business Park, it's all this area here, so it's shown as industrial
Oh, I'm looking at the
office
wrong
use.
hue of purple here. I was looking at mixed
Can
use
you see
purple.
where the cursor's moving right in here?
Yeah,
Okay,
yep.
that's what we're talking about. The discussion on uses that would be permitted or conditional uses within that land use or zoning district is a different discussion that you will be having later this month
Okay.
regarding zoning, right? So this is the guiding land uses, but there are a lot of things that would be allowed and not allowed, and you control that through your zoning.
Okay.
So would you want this area to be housing?
No, well, I'm not.
No, or
the-
different types of industrial, and would those industrials be permitted uses or conditional uses? So that's kind of the parameters that we're thinking of. And that specific discussion, like I said, you'll be having in December.
Okay, well then I won't waste any more time on it. If that's, is there anything else to present?
No, I would just
Just
add
the
that,
process.
we would ask, that you continue this public hearing. The draft chapters are out there on our website. They are draft, and they are being redrafted and organized, and, some things being added to that, some things being taken out. So rather than have you approve something that isn't quite final yet, and we would ask that you continue this public hearing to December 11th. It's our goal to have this up and reposted, the final draft, I think in about a week or a
The
week.
20th.
On the 20th, or actually shortly thereafter, 2 weeks before the December meeting, so everyone will have a chance to look at this. You will, the final draft, then before it goes on to council.
Okay. Before I open the public hearing, I would like to thank you and the staff that were involved in this process, as well as Jeff and his crew. I can't believe it's already been almost a year or more since we
More.
started this.
More,
A little bit more, yeah.
But it's been a really enjoyable process. And I think you guys all did a very good job guiding us along the way. So
thank you.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, we're
More than-
almost done. We're almost there. Believe it or not, we still have a year's worth of work ahead of us, but it won't be every other month meetings. We do have the schedule up here, so once this draft document does get approved by yourselves and the city council, we have to send it to our adjacent jurisdictions. They get 6 months to review it, so those would be our adjacent cities and the county. Then after that 6-month period ends, we get to submit our plan to the Met Council, and then they will bless it or not bless it, and there may be likely to be some back and forth. And then once they have a plan that they've approved, then it will come back before you for official adoption of the final plan, and then to the city council. So, yeah, less intense. We're not done yet, Mr. Chair, but certainly less intense.
Who
So,
gets to buy the champagne then when you guys are all done? All right. Well, thank you
Thank
again.
you.
It's been enjoyable, and we have a little bit more work to do. But so with that, I would then open the public hearing and ask that if anybody here tonight would like to speak to this, can come to the podium. And if there's nobody, then I would stand for a motion to continue the public hearing until December 11th, 2017, as recommended by staff. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And we'll see you on December 11th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Our fourth item on the agenda this evening is an application of Discover Church for a planned unit development amendment to allow leasable showroom space for a business located at 14300 Burnsville Parkway. And presenting this item is Ms. Dean.
Good evening, Chair, members of the commission. So the specific property, it's located south of County Road 42 and just west of Burnsville Parkway. The property is zoned I3, as is the surrounding area, or actually it's zoned I3 plan unit development, as well as the surrounding area is zoned either I3 or I3 PUD. And the property is guided industrial. It's also known as the South Cross Business Park area for reference. This is an aerial photo. It gives you a general view of the site and surrounding. From the sky, it appears to be an industrial building, and that's how it was built. So in 2002, Mack & Book approached the city and built, through the building permit process, a manufacturing and office book production company, and occupied about 54,000 square feet of the building. And then in 2008, they moved out, and Crossroad Church ended up purchasing the property and going through a process, a plan unit development process, to occupy 100% of the building. That was approved through the city process, and a church use has been there ever since. Currently today, Discover Church has taken over the space as churches transfer hands. Discover Church is a current occupant. They did approach the city and asked about leasing space to a business, a carpet and flooring type business with a business showroom. And because there's already a plan unit development as part of the approval, and a development approval is associated with that specifically, staff advised that a plan unit development amendment would be required. The specific tenant space is about 5,000 square feet, and would occupy the southeast portion of the building, indicated in the red highlighted area. And there would be minor modifications to the exterior of the building on the south elevation to add an exit door, or could be an entry door to the space. No other modifications are proposed to the exterior of the building. Parking as it is today, and I'll go back to the site plan. Parking of 246 stalls would remain on the site, as well as the existing landscaping and general flow of the site design. There is a plan unit development deviation requested. So in an I3 zoning district, you can have showroom, but it needs to be associated with a principal use like a warehouse or manufacturing company, and then the showroom would be accessory to that. However, a retail showroom on its own is technically not allowed. So that would be another reason for a plan unit development amendment request. So the PUD deviation would be to allow retail showroom as a principal use within that building. There are PUD benefits to allowing this type of use within the I3 PUD zone property. Showroom is an expected land use within our industrial guided properties. If you look within our comprehensive plan, showroom is listed. And that would bring the site in greater compliance with the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan, it's currently industrial, which typically a lot of our religious institutions are not located within industrial type land use typically. The proposed tenant is also an existing Burnsville business. So they're currently located within an I1 zoning district within the city boundaries. Staff does recommend approval of the request with a recommendation that the current PUD is still in full force and effect. At time of occupancy, we're asking that the formal construction plans are provided and that occupancy is reviewed for parking requirements, but staff is confident that they will meet that, especially because the proposed use is off-peak of the church use. And we're also recommending that a comprehensive sign plan is provided. When you have a multi-tenant situation, our sign code states that a comprehensive sign plan is required, so that would be part of their submittal. Currently, on their plans, a sign is not proposed, but certainly in the future, that's something that likely would be requested of staff. With that, if there's any questions, I'm available, as well as the applicant and representation from the applicant as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Dean on this application?
Sure, I have one question.
Commissioner Bradford.
Ms. Dean, I appreciate the presentation. I know when we've talked about comprehensive sign plans in the past, typically isn't it the responsibility of the landowner because do I understand the comprehensive sign plan would need to incorporate both Discovery Church's signage and the tenant? I know we've had issues in other parts of the city where the tenant was being required to, because the landlord would not. So is the landlord going to come back to us with the comprehensive sign plan for the entire building, which would encompass the tenant and the church? Or are we gonna, because I know we've struggled with that in the past, specifically on Highway 13.
Yep, so the owner of the property is the applicant in this case, and it would be the owner's responsibility to provide that.
Okay. I
The,
thought I'm sorry, I thought there was some information that they were gonna have the tenant do it, so I might have, it did say in their background, item 15, the tenant will submit appropriate documents for the signed plan, but as long as we've cleaned that up.
ultimately, it will be the owner's responsibility to provide that.
Sure, that's the only question I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Brederick. Any other questions for Ms. Dean? Commissioner Walter?
None for me.
No questions. Ms. Dean, I have a question relating to this business use in this building. Specifically, the tax implications of a tax exempt entity leasing space to a for-profit business. Do you have any information on how that works from either a local or state or, I don't know, federal level?
So you're correct, currently the property, it is tax exempt. As far as from a planning standpoint, we don't, typically get into those details on how things are assigned or paid, or as long as they are paid, then they can move forward. As far as the business itself, if they're for-profit, they would be required to pay any taxes that, just sales taxes, for example. But other than that, the city really, wouldn't get involved. It may be, the nonprofit, if they're profiting, their tax exemption might be at risk, but from a city standpoint, we really wouldn't get involved in that portion of it.
Okay. I guess, and the reason why I asked that question is because if a not-for-profit entity, and I'm not making any assumptions in saying this, but were to get into the business of buying property and leasing it, that would be a significant advantage to other building owners in the city. And so I want to make sure we're being fair to all other building owners. And maybe I can point that question at the applicant if they want to come up. That was the reason why I'm wondering if those implications change at all. So I don't know if maybe the applicant can give us some insight into that at all. You might have more information on those details.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Jeff LaFavor, and I am with IAG Commercial. We've been hired by Discovery Church to represent the church in leasing of this excess space. I have with me Senior Pastor of Discovery Church, Andrew Johnston, who's available for any questions specific to the church. So a little background on this. We have consulted with Discovery Church, and we've talked to them about potential tax implications of leasing out to a for-profit business, and they will have to work through that with their tax accountant. I do want to say that the reason that the church is doing this is that the church was previously about 750 attendees on an average Sunday, went through a pastoral change that caused a significant change in the church attendance. About 2 years ago, Pastor Johnston was hired to pastor the church, and as a result, the church is growing again and working towards a point of stability, financial stability. As part of this, though, they have a 55,000 square foot building that they're not fully occupying, and as they work to reduce expenses, they are looking to lease some excess space. And part of that is this tenant. This tenant is a for-profit tenant, as Ms. Dean has spoken about. But it is a 5-year lease with a 1-year right to renew for 3 years. The intention is not to make it, I know 8 years seems like a long time, but in the world of commercial real estate, it's not always. And the intent is to give them sufficient time as a tenant in fairness to them, but ultimately hope that the church down the road will be able to occupy the building completely once again. And so that's kind of the circumstances. It's not meant to be an economic advantage that would put others at ill. It simply is a way for the church to bring more financial stability to them and to better utilize space that's not currently being fully utilized.
Thank you for that clarification, Jeff. Commissioners, are there any questions for the applicant while we have them up here? Thank you for the clarification on that, because I was That's what I was looking for, so. With that, I would open the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak to this item, you can please come to the podium, give us your name and address for the record. And seeing nobody, I will close the public hearing, and I would turn it over to the commission for any further discussion or a motion on this application.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Walter.
I'll move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of the PUD amendment to allow showroom and office space at 3203 Corporate Center Drive, subject to the three outlined conditions.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes. And that will go to the city council on Tuesday, November 21st at 5:30. Our next, 5:30. Our next item on the agenda, sorry, is, I apologize, I have too many windows open here. Public hearing for an interim use permit for La 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 LLC at 771 Lady Bird Lane and 721 Lady Bird Lane. And presenting on that item is Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. This specific property, it is zoned GIM, and it's in our gateway area of the city. It is just west of 35W, north of Highway 13, with access off of Lady Bird Lane. It does consist of 2 parcels, as highlighted by the chair. A little background about the request. So back in 2005, there was an IUP that was approved specific to the landscaping business on site. Fast forward to, and in your background, there's a more detailed history that's explained on how we got to today. But in 2015, there was an IUP that was approved specific to soil remediation. After that approval by city council, the property owner sued the city, and we were in court for about a year and a half or so, and recently reached a court settlement. So fast forward to today, 2017, we're basically following the court settlement stipulation agreement. And within that, again, included in your background and as an attachment, this would be a continuation of that 2005 IUP to allow the landscaping business to continue for 7 years. It would also allow soil remediation to occur within a 4-year period, or by December 31st of 2021. And then it would also require that the property owner bring the site into a standard for future development. So it would get it to the point where it's prepared for a future building pad, for example, and ready for development for example, office showroom that was shown in our 2040 comp plan draft. Within the IUP approval for today for 2017, we're also recommending that Planning Commission include the settlement agreement terms that are specifically laid out, as well as elements of the 2015 approval. We got to the point where a development contract was provided to the property owner. However, it was not signed because of the lawsuit that was brought upon the city. So we're recommending that the 2015 IUP development contract with revisions that coordinate with the settlement agreement are signed or provided to the property owner and then signed. We're also recommending that any final design is reviewed by our city engineer. These are both consistent with our city code and ordinance requirements. And then we're also requesting that they follow national guidelines, the NPDES permitting requirements, which would be done through the MPCA, and that an end use plan is provided. So what that would entail is removal of any berms and getting that site prepped for future development. There are a series of recommendations that are included in your background. I'm not going to read through all of them unless you want me to. But staff does recommend approval of the proposed IUP according to the conditions in your staff report. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. We also have Jenny Faulkner, our Community Development Director, that can answer detailed questions as well.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff on this item?
Chair, I have none.
No questions from Commissioner Bradrick?
Wow. None from me either.
No questions? This seems fairly straightforward to me, so I don't have any questions either. So with that, I would open the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak to this item, please come to the front and give us your name and address for the record. And seeing nobody, I will close the public hearing and turn it back over to the commission for any discussion or a motion on this item.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
The floor is yours.
I move the planning commission recommend the city council approval of the interim use permit for mining and soil remediation for the properties located at 721 and 771 Lady Bird Lane with the following conditions laid out in our background.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Dean, for that presentation. Our next item on the agenda is updates. Are there any updates from the commission or staff? Normally I ask Deb when our next comp plan meeting is, but
December 11th.
December 11th.
Yes.
Any other updates from staff?
I do have a copy of the agenda for next meeting on November 27th to pass out.
Great. All right.
Other than that, I do not have any other updates.
Thank you for a quick meeting this evening. With that, commissioners, I would stand for a motion for adjournment.
Chair, I move for adjournment.
We have a motion.
I second the
We
motion
have a
for
second
adjournment.
for the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you for coming tonight and have a great rest of your evening.
You know, this isn't.